Hey, today we have Most Expensive Mistakes in History, Part 2.
One small slip up can cause a catastrophic fallout like no other. Following on from part 1, here are some more monumentally expensive mistakes that will go down in history for all the wrong reasons.
If you didn't catch Part 1, I will link it in the description.
Number 10. Superman's mustache. Cinema audiences may have noticed something strange about Henry Cavill's performance as Clark Kent, aka Superman, in the 2017 movie Justice League. Critics quickly began talking about the actor's haphazardly blurry upper lip, which made Superman look perplexingly non-human in various close-up shots throughout the film. As it turns out, this unnerving facial deformity was actually the result of an embarrassing and costly mistake, especially considering Justice League ended up being the lowest-grossing movie in the DC Extended Universe. After filming wrapped, Warner Brothers realized they needed to schedule some urgent reshoots for extra scenes, but there was one small problem. Cavill was already filming for Mission Impossible 6, and he'd grown a big old mustache especially for it. Despite Warner Brothers arguing how much easier it would be to add a virtual mustache to the actor for Mission Impossible than to remove it for Justice League, and even offering to pay for the work themselves, Paramount banned Cavill from shaving his facial hair. With no other option, video effects artists had to painstakingly remove the stash scene by scene, which, along with the payout of organizing the reshoots, ended up costing a whopping $25 million. A hefty fine to pay for just one mustache.
That is insane. Also, wild how these contracts work. And how advanced technology is that we can even add or take away a mustache. I mean, granted, taking it away didn't look great, but I haven't seen either movie. Let me know if you think it was worth it.
Number 9. Lottery loss. Most people can only dream about winning the lottery, but for one anonymous pensioner in Coventry, England, that dream very nearly became a reality. In October 2010, the Euro Millions jackpot was worth a staggering $145 million, the biggest lottery prize in British history thus far, and hopeful ticket holders eagerly awaited their numbers to come up. After the announcement on October 8th, over 1,000 people submitted claims that they were the possible winner, including a 70-year-old woman who came forward to confess that her husband might have thrown away her winning ticket. She claimed that she played the lottery every week and always wrote down her numbers in a notepad before passing the ticket to her husband for safekeeping. After hearing speculation that the winning ticket was purchased in Coventry, she checked her numbers and couldn't believe her luck until she realized the ticket was nowhere to be seen. The discarded winnings would have made her the 589th richest person in Britain, ranking higher than Phil Collins and David Bowie before his death, making this one costly mistake. After coming to terms with the unfortunate situation, the pensioner said she had forgiven her husband of 50 years, but I'm sure he won't be taking the trash out ever again. Number 8.
I would also forgive him. He's your husband of 50 years, not some guy you met on the street last week. So, makes sense to me. But I probably wouldn't forget that he lost me the chance of being richer than Phil Collins. In the Air Tonight, Susudio. I don't know what that says about Phil Collins, but this was the exact example of sunken cost fallacy that I gave in the previous expensive mistakes video, where someone could start buying lottery tickets every single week and then one day realizes, okay, all that money I've spent on these lottery tickets accumulated is a small fortune. But then instead of abandoning that strategy and starting to save, they double down and decide to buy more lottery tickets to try to make that money back that they've already spent. The thing is, this woman was so close to being the outlier of that situation. Shame.
Splendid China. Successful theme parks can be total money-making machines, but Florida's Splendid China Park proved that it's not easy getting a brand new attraction off the ground. This 75-acre model replica park in Citrus Ridge near Orlando cost $100 million to build and was intended as a companion to Splendid China theme park in Shenzhen, China, but it ended up being a cash-devouring graveyard instead. After opening to some 3.5 million visitors in 1993, the Chinese government bought out its American partners to gain full ownership of the park, with property developer Josephine Chen, who came up with the idea, at the helm. Soon after, concerns arose that the park was being used as a gateway for communist propaganda, and Americans started losing interest. Protests also began regarding the recreation of religious exhibits that were not of Chinese origin. like the Potala Palace built by the Tibetan people, which was home to successive Dalai Lamas since 1645. In November 1995, the Florida's Pinellas County School Board voted to ban trips to the park, and even a sudden name change to Chinatown in 1996 couldn't save it. By 1999, it was reported that Splendid China had lost $9 million each year, or about $200 million in total, and its inevitable closure was set for December 31st, 2003. The site went up for sale at just $30 million in 2009, but suffered brutal looting and vandalism which left it completely barren. Demolition officially began in May 2013, and by March 2016, the park was gone completely. Number 7. Cerro Grande Fire.
I wonder what's on that land now. Also, I wonder if Florida probably wouldn't have been their target market. He said it was near Orlando, so they have some big theme parks over there. Disney, Universal, I think there's a Legoland. The competition is stiff. I don't know if I would have gone to a Splendid China type place. I'm just not a theme park person though, so it wouldn't have been personal.
On May 10, 2000, a wildfire known as the Cerro Grande Fire became one of the most destructive events the state of New Mexico has ever seen. The blaze was intended as a deliberate controlled burn during a 10-year plan to protect the Bandelier National Monument and reduce the national fire hazards in its surrounding areas. Drought conditions in the late 90s made the area tinder dry and subject to possible ignition under unexpected circumstances like a lightning strike, so Bandelier officials hoped the controlled burn would thin the coniferous and grassy areas. Unfortunately, they didn't account for high winds on the Cerro Grande summit where the fire was started, and the blaze quickly ripped through 150,000 acres of land. Thankfully, no lives were lost, but after multiple evacuations, the fire was not declared fully extinguished until the 20th of July, by which point the damage was irreversible. Officials were faced with harsh criticism for proceeding with the fire despite the contradictory weather conditions, and the U.S. General Accounting Office has estimated that the total damages cost around $1 billion. Number 6.
At least no one
Spirit of
died.
Kansas crash. The B-2 stealth bomber is an impressive piece of equipment, but on February 23, 2008, the Spirit of Kansas 89-0127 became the first of its kind to spectacularly crash just moments after taking off outside Guam. The U.S. Air Force bomber had already logged over 5,100 flight hours when it was suddenly brought down over the runway, but the state-of-the-art warplane might not have ended up a fiery wreck had it been for one simple fix. Reports found that the cause of the crash was a few drops of rainwater in 3 of the 24 air pressure sensors that feed data to the flight control system, which distorted the plane's positioning. Once the moisture evaporated, the crew's recalibrated sensors were providing false data on airspeed and pressure, which measure altitude, causing the aircraft to stall. During previous B-2 deployments to humid Guam, where planes are mostly stored outside, maintenance personnel had reportedly used an unofficial fix by turning on the heat and boiling off moisture before calibration. If this bootleg procedure had been widely communicated, the first crash in the stealth bomber's 19-year flying history might have been avoided. Thankfully, the 2 pilots ejected in time, but the $1.4 billion warplane was reduced to scrap metal in minutes, making this one costly human error. Number 5. Costa Concordia Disaster. On January 13, 2012, the Italian Costa Concordia ship set sail for a week's cruise around the Mediterranean Sea, but it was tragically destined to become one of the most expensive marine losses in history. A few hours after leaving Civita Vecchia, the captain, Francesco Schettino, deviated from the standard course by ordering a maritime salute while approaching the island of Giglio, an area known for rocky outcrops. When dangerous terrain became visible, Schettino ordered a change in course, but communication issues with the Indonesian helmsman meant the ship was steered in the wrong direction. In the 13 seconds it took to rectify, the ship ran aground with 1,023 crew members and 3,206 passengers on board, suffering a 174-foot tear on the left port side and flooding in 5 key areas before capsizing and killing 32 people. An operation to refloat and free the ship from the huge rocks it was embedded in began in September 2013, costing a record-breaking $1.2 billion. The captain and 4 other crew members were tried for misconduct, and Schettino was sentenced to 16 years in prison for his actions. The total cost of the disaster is now an estimated $2 billion. More than 3 times the $612 million it cost to build, which included victims' compensations, lawsuits of $93 million, salvage costs, and $100 million for the ship to be broken into scrap metal. Number 4.
I understand that it's not common that you go on a cruise ship and something bad happens, just statistically with how many cruise ships go out a year. But my mind can't help going to Titanic. And it makes me never want to take a cruise.
New Bay Bridge. When you're redesigning something as
Just me?
monumental as a
I don't
bridge,
know.
disputes are bound to happen. But the debacle over the New Bay Bridge in California ended up taking over a decade longer and several $billions more than the original cost to build. After the eastern section of the original Bay Bridge collapsed following the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 and another quake in 1999, the California Department of Transportation announced the state would spend 7 years replacing it. The original state-funded proposal of $1.3 billion was for a simple skyway like California's San Mateo Bridge, but politicians and residents called for a more impressive Golden Gate-style structure. The mayors of San Francisco and Oakland then began contesting the alignment of the bridge on either side, delaying the process for a further 2 years. Eventually, a design was agreed on and the date of unveiling was set for 2004, but construction still hadn't started in 2001 and the cost was already up to $2.6 billion. By 2004, steel prices were up 50% and the booming economy pushed the cost of $5.6 billion. And after going back to the drawing board, toll prices were raised to $5 to compensate. Despite further complications including a $25 million fix on shoddy bolts, the New Bay Bridge eventually opened in 2013 with a final price tag of $6.5 billion, a 2,500% overrun from earliest talks of some $250 million. Number 3.
A bit after the Bay Bridge opened, I lived in San Francisco in this area called Nob Hill, where you can see the bridge clearly. And I remember thinking, beautiful, but how much money do they spend on the lights? I don't know if they changed the way that they do the lights now or what, but it seems so expensive. That plus the toll price, I never wanted to take that bridge.
Australia's NBN rollout. In the modern first world, working Wi-Fi is something most people take for granted. But Australians may have a newfound relationship with the pitfalls of digital connectivity after widespread controversy over botched plans to install nationwide broadband. In 2009, the government-funded National Broadband Network Company vowed to deploy future-proof network connectivity across the country by 2020. But 10 years on, it has been met with many complications and criticisms. Constant delays and desperate attempts to reassess the possibility of supplying terrestrial fiber network coverage to 93% of Australian premises caused negative media attention and public outcry. As the sixth largest country in the world with a relatively sparse population of just 24.6 million, the reality of bridging the digital divide where population density is just 3 people per kilometer squared is hard to envision. As a result, the project cost jumped from an estimated $29.5 billion before the 2013 federal election to some $46 billion afterwards, and it's now expected to cost a staggering $51 billion by 2020. The worst part? Australia still ranks only 60th in the world for broadband connectivity. Sometimes it's best to quit while you're ahead. Number 2.
I'll try to find an article to figure out how much it ended up costing.
Ron Wayne's Apple shares. Most people
This
would
one
kill
stresses
for a
me out.
10% share in Apple nowadays, but one man threw away his golden ticket to wealth beyond his wildest dreams for just $800. You've probably heard of Steve
Ron.
Jobs and Steve Wozniak, but there was once a little-known third founder of Apple, Ron Wayne, who joined the former young entrepreneurs in 1976 to oversee mechanical engineering and documentation. He even penned the original logo. In return, he gained a 10% stake in the business, but after becoming concerned about possible debts falling on him, he decided to sell his share less than 2 weeks after drawing up his own contract. Although Wayne had claimed that he doesn't regret the potential screw-up, his original share of the company would now be worth $120 billion, making him the richest man in the world according to the 2019 Forbes Rich List. By the end of 2019, the global tech giant is valued at $1.2 trillion, so even a small slice of the remarkable company could be life-altering. One thing Wayne does regret, though, is not holding on to his original contract, which he also sold for $500 in the 90s. Unfortunately for him, the same contract sold at the Sotheby's auction in 2011 for a whopping $1.6 million. Number 1.
That Ron drawing the logo story made me think of David Cho. I think this is how you pronounce his last name. who he painted the Facebook offices and was paid in shares. And when the company went public, he got $200 million, something around there. I don't know if that's before or after taxes, but he has an amazing story on the JRE podcast of searching for dinosaurs in the Congo. And I think I've never heard a story on a podcast more fascinating. I'm going to try to find it for you. It was a ride.
Chernobyl Disaster. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster of 1986 is undoubtedly the biggest socio-economic accident
probably
in
the
peacetime
worst
history, and the death
of this
toll,
list.
including those who died from cancer years later, is now expected to be over 1 million. On the 26th of April, the Soviet government ordered the operators of Chernobyl to keep the reactors at full power after initially asking them to slow it down to low for a test, and a series of complications and design faults in the control rods being handled set off a devastating chain reaction. As high pressure blew the lid off the reactor, the rods ignited into a graphite fire which spewed radioactive molten fuel into the open air, instantly costing the lives of 30 immediate responders. The fire took over a week to extinguish, and the repercussions are still being felt today. Recently, a huge gripping claw in Pripyat used to lift graphite rods after the disaster has been declared so radioactive that it could kill with a single touch. Although such massive losses are hard to account for, a report from the International Atomic Energy Agency estimates that the disaster, which was caused by misconduct and faulty equipment, cost over $235 billion. This includes cleanup costs, social benefits to 7 million survivors, and cost of vacated agriculture and logging land, while total spending from the Ukraine after the dissolution of the Soviet Union set the country back at least a decade in economic development. Which of these monumental mistakes do you think could have been most easily avoided? And do you know of any other costly mistakes that should have made this video? Let me know in the comments below, and it may be featured in a future video. Thanks for watching.
I think the Henry Cavill mustache one could have been avoided. I don't know how, but that one gets my vote. And I definitely liked part 2 better than part 1 of this series. There was a lot more pop culture references and modern day examples. So in the last video, I asked you guys to write down your most expensive mistake, and some of them were so funny. So please feel free to do that again. I mentioned in that video that my most expensive mistake had nothing to do with money. So that's life. The channel is called Be Amazed. I'll make sure to link it in the description for you. And for a literary recommendation, I have something that's unrelated on my mind. Actually, I have the book. I'll go get the book. Just hold on. Okay, I'm back. Charles Bukowski, Hijo de Satanás is the Spanish translation name. That's not what it's called in English. It's not Son of Satan. The person who sold it to me said it was called Septuagenarian Stew, if I'm not mistaken. I never checked if that was correct or not, so I'll write the correct answer there. But I'm not even a huge fan of Bukowski, although I do like the dirty realism genre. This is a collection of short stories. I picked it up at I guess you'd call it a book fair of sorts, last weekend in my city. Anyway, I gravitated towards it because I've been writing short stories that I'd like to eventually publish, and reading short stories from authors that I enjoy, and then also from authors that I wouldn't necessarily read typically. So anywhere from Dostoevsky to Margaret Atwood, Murakami has great short stories, Bukowski, Bret Easton Ellis. I really like his short stories. He wrote Less Than Zero and what's that one? American Psycho. I've never read American Psycho. Anyway, I bring this up because I hope that you guys can recommend some short story authors to me. As far as the genre goes, I'm open, really, to anything. So let me know. And other than that, leave your thoughts on the most expensive mistakes in history. Drop your most expensive mistake. And that's really all I've got for you. So thank you so much for watching with me, and I'll catch you in the next video.